This happened in the countryside of Georgia. I was 15 at the time, with my brother Ronnie, who was 18. Ronnie was big on exploring creepy places, and he somehow heard of this huge abandoned house not far from us from someone he knew. I guess he didn't want to explore it alone, so one day he brought me along with him to go check it out. Ronnie parked the car in a rather hidden location, covered by a bunch of trees. The house property wasn't visible from here. We'd have to walk down this concrete road that clearly hadn't been touched in forever. There were giant cracks with grass and weeds growing through it just about everywhere. All the grass around the road was overgrown, almost overtaken with weeds as well. Suddenly, we noticed a woman down the road walking behind us in our direction. I asked Ronnie what we should do, and he said to just play it cool. If we started to run, it would look suspicious. The woman was walking with both her hands folded behind her back as if she were going for a relaxing stroll. We kept walking at our regular pace, maybe picking it up a bit, just slightly. I turned around once more, and she was much closer now, and I could see a smile on her face. She was looking back at me. Then she said, "Lovely day today, isn't it?" My brother and I simultaneously responded, "Yeah." She kept walking behind us, getting closer and closer. Then, as she was almost right on top of us with her hands still folded behind her back, she said, "I have to go to bed now." Ronnie and I looked at one another with confused looks. We both picked up the pace now without saying a word to each other. We just saw in each other's faces that it was time to speed up and get away from this woman. My brother turned around one last time and said, "Have a great day, ma'am." We stayed in the speedwalk pace for a while, and the next time we turned around, that woman was gone completely off the road. That meant she must have taken off into the woods, which was incredibly creepy. It was absolutely a chilling start to this little field trip. We made it to the house. It was noticeably deteriorated. There were vines of ivy growing up certain parts of the walls. Some of the glass windows were shattered, meaning it had been explored before, and that's exactly how we entered the house, through one of the broken windows. We climbed in, making sure not to cut ourselves on any broken glass. Right from the start, surprisingly, there was a lot of stuff left behind, like all the furniture, albeit it looked a little worn out. All the wall decor, the little decorations on the coffee table, even when we went into the kitchen and checked the fridge, there were food items left behind, very rotten food items. Opening that fridge was like getting smacked in the face with a smell of death. After checking the whole first floor, we went down to the basement. The basement, like the first floor, was still completely furnished. Although down here it was a lot messier. There were a ton of things like loose sheets of paper and garbage spread out on the floor. The carpet was a faded blue color. There was a little bit of light that came into the room through the windows at the top of the walls. Then we heard a noise from upstairs, a distinct thump. We both just froze like statues, waiting for any kind of noise again. Within a few seconds, we chalked it up to just being a noise of an old, deteriorating house. There wasn't much else to see in the basement, so we went back up to the first floor. The only place left to check was the upstairs. At the top of the stairs, from what I remember, was the bathroom directly in front of the stairs, and then to the left was a small hallway that led to an open door. The hallway cut left. I don't remember what was to the right, but I'll tell you why in a second. Ronnie and I went left and into the first doorway. It was a bedroom, a decently sized bedroom, but it didn't seem like the master bedroom. There was a double bed in there and an antique-looking dresser. There were some old articles of clothing left behind in the dresser, nothing I wanted to touch. Ronnie left the room first, and then he said, "Mare Ned," scared-sounding tone. I looked up at him, and he was looking down the hall. I stepped into the hall and saw what he was looking at. There was that woman from earlier, standing in front of the bed in another bedroom at the end of the short hallway. She was still smiling like before. She opened her mouth and said, "Do you want to see what's behind my back?" My brother screamed, "Run," and he pushed me to start running. We both made a beeline for the front door and sprinted to the outside. I couldn't help but look back at the house, at the upstairs windows, expecting her to be at one of them, but she wasn't. I also just had to make sure she wasn't chasing after us. We kept running until we were out of sight from the house, and then we kept running some more, even though my cardio sucked and I was out of breath. When we finally made it back to the car, I gagged, trying to throw up from exhaustion. We got in the car, and Ronnie drove us home. The whole ride, we couldn't stop theorizing what it was that just happened. We said it might have been some loony woman off her meds or escaped from a mental facility or something. Maybe she was living in that abandoned house. But even explaining all of that away, the big question is, what did she have behind her back? And was she holding it that whole time she was walking behind us? So many questions that will never be answered. My friends and I live in a very nice area. Try and picture the quintessential suburban neighborhood. It's relatively quiet, and people are used to the secluded, isolated feel it provides. The last place you'd expect anything dangerous to really happen, with the exception of what I'm about to tell you, my town radiated the calming silence you'd eventually come to crave. This happened a few summers ago, and as much as I try to resist it, I will never be able to erase the memory from my mind. Anyway, my friend Caitlin and I had always been those kids to try to cause trouble wherever we could. Looking back, I struggled to justify our behavior. I guess it was our teenage manifestation of a rebellious spirit or something like that. We lived on the same street and hung out after school every single day. Because our neighborhood consisted of nothing but very large houses and towering trees, we didn't usually have much to do on weekdays unless we wanted to journey a few towns over. So we ended up making our own fun most of the time. In our neighborhood, there was a well-known mansion at the top of a hill that had been abandoned for as long as people could remember. It wasn't really special. Every kid who lived in my town had been inside. The rooms were essentially stripped of anything of value, and finding a wall that wasn't coated with multiple layers of spray paint was almost impossible. It was especially creepy because it stood at the edge of a massive cemetery. For Caitlin and me, this cemetery mansion was a kind of default, a plan B if you will. If we had nothing else to do, we'd throw some graffiti up inside or just smoke and chill on the roof. This was one of those nights. It was like 3 a.m. on a Wednesday, and Caitlin and I had just been flaked on by a couple of girls that we made plans with. The two of us were kind of upset, so we figured chucking rocks at the cemetery mansion would be a decent way to release some energy. Had we been sober, we might have been more cautious about doing something so stupid, but it was late, it was summer, and we didn't care. I convinced Caitlin not to drive. We were more than a little drunk, and after about a 20-minute walk, we crested the hill and were met with a familiar yet eerie sight. Vines twisted and hung down the muddied bricks. Most of the windows were shattered, with menacing points at the tip of the roof. Definitely a sinister feel, especially at such an ungodly hour of the night. Without warning, Caitlin picked up a stone and chucked it towards the house. It sailed gracefully before smashing through one of the fourth-floor windows. It was difficult to confirm in the low light of the moon and surrounding street lights, but the deafening sound of the shattering glass confirmed it. Gleefully, I picked up a rock and did the same, puncturing one of the second-floor windows. Before the mansion's fourth floor, there was a single small window, probably an attic, that stood lonely as the highest room in the house. Caitlin challenged me to hit it. I missed a good 10 throws before giving up with an aggravated sigh. Caitlin grinned, picked up a rock, and said, "Watch this." He took a long look at the tiny target and launched it. I watched in awe as the rock flew through the air, shattering the attic window with a satisfying crash. I was shocked. The two of us stood there for a second, admiring what just happened. Caitlin was about to pick up another rock when I, still looking at the shattered window, saw a dark object fly out of the emptiness and sail down towards us. I literally jumped, confused as to what I just saw. Caitlin and I looked down at the rock that had just landed on the gravel in front of us, the exact same rock Caitlin had just thrown. It was easily recognizable as it had a sort of Z imprint on one of the faces. The two of us stood there in silence, obviously a little shaken up. It was really late for other kids to be doing the same thing we were, but that was the only explanation we could come up with. We agreed that it must have been a group of teenagers trying to mess with us, an idea that actually excited us. The devious grins on our faces told the story. We were going to try and get the jump on them before they could scare us. The two of us quietly made our way to the front door, ducking under a thick vine that hung from the towering pillars above. The door was slightly ajar, but it always was. It had long since been misaligned from its hinges and didn't close properly. As quietly as we could, we stepped inside, our eyes adjusting to the minimal light and our noses to the smell of mildew and rotting wood. We slowly made our way up the creaky stairs, unable to silence the sound of shifting wood beneath our feet. We had made it to the fourth floor and were positioned at the base of the final staircase. Interestingly, we had never been up there. The entrance to the roof was on the opposite side of the house, and this room must have eluded us. Caitlin took the lead, and I followed directly behind. The staircase led to a small wooden door, which we presumed was the attic door. Caitlin put a hand on the doorknob and even looked back at me. I nodded, and in one fluid motion, he flung the door open. Before I could even see anything, I was struck by a smell that made me take a few reactionary steps backward. It was disgusting. It smelled like death and rot. Something was clearly decaying in that room. Caitlin covered his nose and entered. I was a little more hesitant to do so, but I decided that I'd rather be by his side than alone on a pitch-black staircase. The sight was even worse than the smell. We found ourselves staring at a tiny room, the floor of which a white pentagram was painted. There were a few unlit candles and a closet door that we didn't open. The smell seemed to be emanating from that closet, and I was worried Caitlin would want to investigate more. To our surprise, the room was void of people. I had enough, though. This was really starting to freak me out, and I couldn't fight the urge to leave any longer. I turned towards the door, and that's when I saw it. I looked down the staircase and saw two cloaked figures looking back up at me. I cursed and ran towards Caitlin. Just then, we heard stomping up the stairs from behind us. Screwed. As the stomping got closer to the door, I was prepared to fend off whoever it was, bracing myself for a fight. Just then, Caitlin yelled at me, "Dude, come on." I whipped around to see Caitlin halfway out of the shattered window, presumably stepping on the roof. I hurriedly did the same, and the second I made it onto the roof, I heard the door forcefully open. We ran across the roof to the entrance we knew about, not wanting to wait to see if we were being followed. Had this situation not been so dire, I don't know if I would have been able to go through with our plan. The darkness made it nearly impossible to see. One wrong step, and we would have been sent tumbling to our deaths. I followed close behind Caitlin, and we made it to the roof entrance. It was a little hatch that led to a ladder. Caitlin failed to open the hatch up. It was locked from the inside. Just then, we heard a booming voice ring out from somewhere in the distance. "They went that way," yelled the freakishly deep voice. To this day, it was the scariest thing I've ever heard anyone say. Without thinking, I stomped on the hatch as hard as I could with my right foot, and it gave way in a crash loud enough to reveal our position to anyone in the house, let alone someone chasing us on the roof. The force of the impact caused me to fall into the hole, and had it not been for my hands reflexively grabbing the ladder, I would have been seriously hurt. Caitlin screamed at me to go, so I climbed down as fast as I could, trying to ignore the pain in my leg. The two of us sprinted down the other staircase and burst out the back door, jumping the fence and running into the cemetery. Caitlin seemed to be fine. He was literally laughing. I, on the other hand, was so scared I could barely think. I never thought squatting behind a gravestone in a cemetery could be so comforting. Caitlin and I maintained a watchful eye on the mansion, half expecting someone to be following us. We waited, and just when we thought the coast was clear, we saw a group of 4 or 5 cloaked figures circling the property, frantically searching under bushes and trees. The two of us crept closer into the cemetery until we were sure there was no chance we could be spotted in the darkness. We hopped the backside fence and haven't been back to that house since. I can only assume that we stumbled upon some kind of cult meeting or ritual. Why they decided to do it in an abandoned house is something I still ask myself. There's an abandoned motel called Crescent Hotel. It's been abandoned for well over a decade. I do a lot of solo urban exploration, sometimes at night. Crescent Hotel is located in Eureka Springs, and during the day it gets scorching hot, too hot to be walking around with my backpack, so I chose to go to the motel during the night. It was very easy to get to. I parked on the side of the road and walked over. There really was no fence or anything to hop over, and there was no security. It was one of the easier structures to get to that I've explored for sure. In the back was a really deep pool with a ton of graffiti. I shined my flashlight up at the actual motel and noticed half of the upstairs room's doors were slid open slightly or just completely shattered. It was kind of creepy looking, but also expected since the place had been abandoned for so long. Of course, other people have explored there. A part of the motel also looked like it had been engulfed in flames and partially burnt down. I looked around the outside for a little while. It was late at night, so there were no sounds of nearby passing traffic besides the sounds of my shoes stepping over various pieces of debris. At one point, my blood ran cold when I heard a voice from somewhere in the vicinity. It sounded like a female's voice. My first instinct in these scenarios is to assume it's some kind of security worker or somebody who may cause trouble for me, so I typically tend to walk out of sight and hide. That's what I did. I ran to one of the other rooms on the ground level and turned off my flashlight. I waited just a minute, and after hearing nothing, I turned it back on. I looked around this little room I was in. The walls were littered with graffiti. There was only one piece of furniture in here, a little dresser with 4 drawers on it and a dusty, dirty old mattress on the floor. I wondered if homeless people would come and sleep here, but honestly, it's just so far away from any real civilization that I doubted it. I left the room and continued around the motel. I would peek inside every little opening on the ground floor below the overhead walkway for the upper-level rooms. Each room was pretty similar to the last, with different miscellaneous graffiti and writings on the walls and old dilapidated furniture. Then I heard a crash-type sound from above, like something falling over. I felt my heart skip a beat. I went back outside and pointed my flashlight up at the walkway above, at the broken glass doors. I felt a rush as I decided to go up there and check out the rooms. What I felt like deep down was that there was an animal in one of the rooms, but there's always that chance that you run into other explorers or perhaps a homeless person in places like this. I made my way upstairs and peeked into each room that I passed. They were all similarly furnished with junk, debris, old mattresses, and odd pieces of old furniture. As I walked further down the walkway, a banging sound became audible. It got louder as I continued to walk. It was a consistent, slow banging, like thump, 2 seconds, thump, 2 seconds, thump. Someone was here. I approached the door to the room I was positive the sound was coming from. As I got closer, it stopped. Uh-oh, maybe they heard my footsteps. I announced to whoever was in there that I'm just an explorer and I mean no harm. I peeked into the room with the flashlight now off. It was almost pitch black in there, but I'm 50% certain I saw the shape of a person a little further into the room by the back wall. The room smelled like straight feces. I pulled my head out from the room to look down at my flashlight and turn it on, but in a careful position to not point the light right into the room right away. I aimed it down at first at the floor, then peered into the room again and slowly pointed the light into the room. I saw 2 pale, bare feet approaching me fast. In a muscle jerk reaction, I pointed the light up more to fully reveal this woman with a bloodied forehead and yellow gunk on her mouth, which was hanging open. It was a sight from a nightmare. I was out of there so quick. I heard the woman screaming as I was running away, and her screams didn't get much further away, which told me she was chasing after me. I ran down the stairs and back outside. I ran the entire way back to my car. I wasn't followed this far. I called one of my good friends, Oliver, who's also into urban exploration. I had invited him to come with me originally to this place, but he was unable to. I told him what just happened. We came to a weird and disturbing agreement that the thumping I was hearing was that woman banging her head on the wall, hence why her forehead was so bloody. When I asked if I should call the police, kind of just thinking out loud, he said definitely not, as I'd be admitting to trespassing. I actually drove around the immediate area by the Taco Bell and a few stores looking for a payphone so I could anonymously call the police about this deranged, dangerous woman. But obviously, payphones are really a thing of the past, so it was just a pointless effort. What I ended up doing was calling the non-emergency number and reporting the deranged woman, but also claiming I was not the one to find her. Rather, I heard someone else had run into her. I was as vague as possible and hung up because I didn't want to stick around there. I don't know if the police eventually went to investigate, but whatever was wrong with that woman, she should have been in a psych ward or something. In all of my years of exploring, I'd never encountered anything like that. There was a house by me nicknamed Ghost House because construction was never finished on it for the longest time, and it had been sitting vacant and unfinished for years. It was on an already kind of sketchy block with a lot of houses that appeared to be either vacant or the owners just didn't care about their properties because of the overgrown grass and weeds. My friends Jolie, Lily, Mabel, and I were bored just driving around town late one night. We got some fast food, then Lily floated the idea of checking out the ghost house, like actually checking it out and going inside. The girls were on board, and so was I. We parked a few houses down. This street only had one streetlight, the rest of it was dark, and a lot of the houses didn't have any lights on, so it really was a dark and kind of creepy block. Like I said, the neighboring houses seemed abandoned too, even though they weren't, due to cars being in some of the driveways. We were all sure to be extra quiet getting out of the car and walking over to the ghost house. Seeing this unfinished two-story house in the dead of night gave off eerie vibes for sure. Next up, we had to figure out a way in. Of course, we tried the front door, and it was locked. We then walked around the house trying every window until one of them slid right open. Jolie was the smallest, so she climbed in through the window and then went to unlock the back door for us, only it was already unlocked, meaning anyone could have just walked right in. We entered the house that smelled like a mix of wood and some kind of rotten cat piss kind of smell. The first floor was a lot more finished than I was expecting, and it was pretty big with lots of rooms but no furniture. We kind of all split up, going different ways. I went up the stairs to the second floor, and up here was a bit more unfinished with a lot of the wall framing exposed. I heard rustling around from downstairs, the sounds of my friends being a bit too loud. So I went back downstairs. Upstairs was pretty empty, so I went back down to run into Jolie, who asked, "What's upstairs?" I said, "It's a bit unfinished up there." She then proceeded to go upstairs and check it out anyway. I proceeded to look for the basement and found it beyond a brown door right under the stairs leading upstairs. As soon as I opened it, I got a whiff of that cat piss type smell I was talking about. I started walking down the steps, and as I got to the bottom, I could see the basement looked a little more decrepit than the rest of the house. The concrete floor was stained with some brownish, rusty-looking material. My first instinct was to think paint, but the color could also match blood. I looked around the mostly empty space and found in one corner a small wooden chair and a little table with a book on it. It was the Holy Bible. I heard footsteps coming down the steps. I said in a volume slightly above a whisper, "Yo, come check this out." When I heard no response, I turned around but didn't see anyone by the stairs. I said, "Who's there?" Then I noticed a girl sitting down, leaning on the wall. Only it took me a second to realize it wasn't Jolie or Mabel. It was some random woman with extremely long and messy hair, looking right at me. Then I heard one of the girls upstairs screaming, followed by Lily calling my name, saying, "Let's get out of here." The only words I could muster up were, "Holy shit," and I ran out of the basement and up the stairs. I saw my friends running out through the back door. I had no idea what they had seen, but I was right behind them. We ran back out front towards the car and didn't stop until we were in. I asked them as we started to drive away what they saw, because I saw some deranged-looking woman come down to the basement. Everyone was talking over each other, but one of the girls finally managed to explain that they saw two men standing in one of the empty rooms on the first floor. They saw some dark objects on the floor in that room, but they couldn't find out what they were in those brief seconds before running away. They didn't get a look at their faces, but they were men based on their statures. I don't know what the hell was going on in that house, if we ran into some satanic cult or if we just ran into some homeless people. You couldn't pay me to ever go back to that house again. I don't live in that town or state anymore, so I don't know what became of that house. But based on the most recent Google Maps picture from 2019, it still wasn't ever finished. A few years ago, I lived in a small town. My family decided to move us 4 hours away to get away from all the drama. While my parents were out of town picking out houses, I brought my friend over and called up my cousins to take a little road trip. The place I wanted to go was pretty much off limits, but we were daredevils and wanted to experience something scary. We picked a place that was 2 to 3 hours away called Bryce Hospital. This place was supposedly haunted due to its history. It was a psychiatric facility where they would keep mentally ill people. There were rumors about how some of the patients were mistreated and tortured. As the population declined, they eventually shut down. Over the years, the building began rotting and succumbing to nature. We decided to leave around 11 p.m. so we could make it there by 2 a.m. The car ride was pretty fun, and we were all very pumped to see what we would find. We arrived around 2:43 a.m. and stopped at the beginning of the dirt road that led to it. We sat there for a few minutes, contemplating if we should really do this or not because we already had a bad feeling. After 10 minutes of staring at the dark road, we decided to go on. As we went down the road, it felt like it would never end. The grass was fully grown, and there were branches everywhere. It was pitch black, and we could barely even see the road. We finally made it to the building, and once we did, we all just stared in amazement. It was huge. The roof was rotted off, and vines were growing all over the walls. In the middle of the parking lot, or what was once the parking lot, was a giant old water fountain that also had vines growing from the sides. It was so dark we could only see what the headlights illuminated. We turned the car off and got out. We began walking into the building, and the first thing I noticed was pentagrams sprayed all over the walls. We kept walking farther in and made our way up the stairs, which was very hard considering they were practically non-existent. We climbed a ladder and got onto what was left of the roof. We looked around and noticed a light in the front of the building. It looked like a phone light. We called out, but nobody answered, and the light vanished as quickly as it appeared. My cousin told us to follow him into another room so he could make sure we were safe, but I had a terrible feeling. I wandered off into another room that was right beside the room they were in. I looked around and saw old mattresses and more graffiti. I heard my cousins talking when all of a sudden, I heard a faint sound. It was like someone threw a rock at the window of the room I was in. I didn't think anything of it and kept looking around. I met back up with my cousins and friend. We decided to go to the basement to check it out. Once we got down there, we had to take a break because it was difficult getting to the bottom due to the stairs being smashed. We sat there catching our breath until we heard a voice from the back of the room. We all paused, looking at each other. I was too afraid to move, fearing whatever was in there would come after me. My cousin walked back there slowly and shined his light around. As the light reached the far end of the room, he saw someone squatted, looking towards the wall. My cousin began backing up slowly with the light still on the guy. Once he got back to where we were, he lifted us out and began pulling himself out. Once we were out, he yelled to the man asking if he was okay. The man turned around and stared blankly at us. There was a moment of silence before the man let out wild screams. He began running towards us. We all started screaming and running away. We had no idea where to run but ended up climbing out of the window. We ended up in the woods behind the building. I remember running and screaming because I heard the man right behind me. My cousins were far ahead of me and I saw their flashlights slowly fading. I ran into so many trees that my entire body started to ache. I finally caught up to them in a clearing. We found a trail and started trying to find our way back to the car, but we ended up going the wrong direction for an hour and decided to turn back and try the other direction. It was a grueling way back, but we finally saw the building again and sighed with relief knowing we weren't far from the car. As we approached the car, we heard rustling in one of the bushes by the building, and like before, a rock flew out and hit my friend. We saw the man emerge from the bush, and we had to make a run for the car. As we were running, the man was a decent length behind us, so we could open the doors and lock them. Once we got in, we started up the car, and when we did, the headlights turned on, only to show the man running towards us. He started banging on the windows with a glass bottle. We put it in drive and took off out of there. The whole entire time we were heading home, we sat in silence. I think we all felt the same sense of shock. My body was shaking. After that night, we never had any interest in urban exploring ever again.